Hello, and welcome to the International Studies Office info session about education abroad, finances, and scholarships. My name is Margaret Walter, and I am a Senior Education Abroad Advisor and Program Manager in the International Studies Office at UVA. I will be talking today about information about finances, financial aid, and scholarships that has been provided by both the ISO and Student Financial Services. Please note that this session is being recorded. In today's presentation, we will start by talking about what study abroad is, give a definition. We'll look at what study abroad costs, existing financial resources, and then financial aid and scholarships specifically for study abroad. So what is study abroad? Sometimes you may hear study abroad or education abroad used interchangeably. Education abroad is the larger umbrella. It refers to both traditional credit-bearing study abroad, but also research, internship, fieldwork, and other opportunities that often, but don't always, involve academic credit. Study abroad assumes academic credit, and that can be either in a traditional classroom model, or it can include research and internships that have a component where credit is earned. In the following slides, when we talk about financial resources, we are doing so for credit-bearing study abroad programs. Earning credit is often a requirement for certain resources. So what does study abroad cost? As with the term on grounds, you will have a total cost of attendance, a combination of billable plus other expenses, commonly including items like airfare, personal expenses, and meals not included in the billable fees. What that cost will be, who you pay, and where to find the information about your program varies by program type. As with all things, there are exceptions in certain cases, so we'll talk next about some tools and tips for determining cost, including where to look for details for your programs of interest. But first, let's look at each one of these examples. So first we talk about UVA programs. These are often faculty-led programs that are billed by UVA. When you look at a UVA program and what it costs, you're looking at the posted program tuition and fees, as well as those other expenses. Again, often airfare, personal expenses, meals, visas, etc. For exchanges, you will continue to pay your UVA tuition and fees, and that is dependent on your school, your year, and your in-state and out-of-state designation. Again, you'll also pay those other expenses like airfare, etc. With outside programs, you will pay the posted tuition and fees for that program, plus those other expenses, plus a UVA admin fee. And that admin fee maintains your enrollment at the University of Virginia and goes towards things like repackaging financial aid, transferring credit, etc. Partner programs can sometimes be referred to as UVA programs. They're a little bit of a hybrid, but there again, you're paying the program tuition and fees, plus other expenses. So now that you know the types of programs and the types of costs to expect, where do you find the information for your program or programs of interest? If you're looking at programs billed by UVA that are UVA programs, you're going to consult the budget sheet on the program page. This will include billable costs, which are in-state or out-of-state, designated as in-state or out-of-state, plus estimates of non-billable expenses. For exchanges, you will consult Student Financial Services for your UVA tuition and fee rates. A list of the types of other expenses to expect, plus links to the host institution website are on the program page, and that's the image in the middle on this slide. Housing options will be, housing will be paid to the host institution or privately depending on your host's housing options. For outside programs, you'll consult the provider or host institution websites for their tuition and fee information. They should also have estimates of additional expenses. Information about the UVA admin fee is found on our fees, billing, and payments page. For the 2020-2021 academic year, it's $500 per term. Use the fact sheet on each program page to determine if tuition and fees are billed by UVA or a program provider or host institution. Programs billed by UVA that aren't exchanges will have a budget sheet at the top of the program page. That's the single red circle on the left side of the screen. The fact sheet will also indicate when the UVA administrative fee is applied for a particular program. And the fact sheet is also on the left with the tuition payments area field and the study abroad admin fee also circled in red. A sample budget sheet is underneath that. Use the cost comparison worksheet, which is on the right of the slide and is also located on the Education Abroad website to compare costs. This is especially helpful for semester students to compare what a semester here would be versus program or programs of interest, but summer and other short-term students can also use it to compare two study abroad programs or to a summer here on grounds for students looking to take classes during the summer either at UVA or abroad. You may have to go to multiple places, as you've seen, to get a full picture of your total cost of attendance. The cost comparison worksheet can help you pull everything together in one place and make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Looking at existing financial resources, and as you look at programs, you want to consider what you can use and if and how you can use your existing financial resources for your term abroad. These resources could include financial aid, including loans, scholarships, existing scholarships, and it could be either supported by UVA or they could be non-UVA scholarships. If you have prepaid education tuition plans, such as the Virginia 529, we'll talk about that in a minute, or family or personal support. Family or personal support could include your savings and any potential earnings from a summer job or other earnings. Some tips and tools for assessing existing financial resources. Consult the financial aid availability chart on our website regarding the portability of your current financial aid and loans. Do you notice anything? This is on the left side of the screen. You'll see that more existing aid types are available in the semester than in the summer or January term. Some types of aid can only transfer for certain types of programs as well. So if the tuition is billed by UVA, for example. So look closely at the chart as a whole and the notes in the bottom. Students on exchanges and on outside programs will be prompted to submit documentation of their cost of attendance for their program abroad. And that's the expense form on the right of the slide. You want to contact your scholarship providers to confirm whether funds for existing scholarships can be used and how. And also for prepaid tuition plan accounts, such as the Virginia 529. Sometimes those may be used for education abroad, but limitations do exist. So contact the account administrator when researching program options to confirm what funds can be used and how. Make sure you understand the various types of programs and their billing processes, similar to the previous point about limitations of financial aid applicability to certain programs. Talk to your parents or other family members who provide financial support about your exciting plans and make sure they are on board. Looking at financial aid for education abroad, to receive aid from Student Financial Services, they require that a financial aid application, so the FAFSA and your profile, is completed and processed. If you have outstanding checklist items in your to-do list in SIS, then your aid for study abroad will be delayed. For students who receive work study during the academic year, that funding is not available while abroad. You may use scholarship aid from outside sources to cover this portion of funding. The university does not cover a student's need amount at another university or program that exceeds the determined need at UVA, so that cost of attendance gap would not be covered by financial aid. But again, we'll be talking about some other resources as well. Terms in which students can study abroad are divided into two categories when talking about financial aid: standard, so fall and spring, and non-standard, January term and summer. During the fall and spring or standard terms, students are eligible to receive multiple types of funding from the university. Student Financial Services will help fund a study abroad program with federal aid such as Pell Grant, direct loans, and Parent Plus loans. Students are eligible to use their institutional grant aid such as Access and DuPont. Students who have been awarded institutional scholarships such as the University Achievement Award or Veterans Benefits may be restricted to only cover certain specific types of study abroad programs. If you were awarded this type of funding, I would suggest that you contact Student Financial Services to see if your program may impact your aid. Any aid awarded to students from outside organizations may be used to cover costs for study abroad unless prohibited by that organization. For non-standard terms, such as January and summer, financial aid funding is limited. For January term, there is limited funding that includes a study abroad grant for UVA study abroad programs. So only UVA study abroad program participants in the January term would be eligible for the grant, not if you petition for another outside program. So the study abroad grant is available for UVA study abroad programs. And there are also federal loans available. Students have to be registered for at least 6 credits in the spring term to be eligible for this aid. For the summer term, Pell Grant and loans are available to cover the study abroad cost. Institutional grants, such as Access, are not available for non-standard terms. Some tips and strategies in terms of financial aid. Student Financial Services strongly encourages you to please sign up for direct deposit so that you can get any financial aid funds quickly. You especially don't want to have to worry about having checks be sent to you abroad and having to try to manage that. Consider giving your parents or guardians power of attorney in case they may need to sign documents on your behalf while you are out of the country. You want to notify your bank and credit card companies that you will be abroad and where you're going and for what period of time. Be aware of whether the host country that you're going to relies on cash for transactions or if they'll also accept credit cards. Determine the type of payment app that you and your parents or guardians will use if they need to send you money. And especially if you are solely dependent or mostly dependent on financial aid funds, create a budget to help you stretch those funds. So you want to look at both the funds you will have available and the costs that you will incur while you're abroad and plan those out ahead of time. Looking at scholarships, there's a wide range of scholarship options available to supplement your other existing financial resources for study abroad. The ISO administers around a dozen education abroad scholarships, which students can apply for through one common application. In 2018-2019, more than $250,000 was awarded to 101 individual UVA students through ISO administered scholarships. The ISO administered scholarship deadline typically falls before most, but not all, program application deadlines. February 15th for summer, fall, and year programs, and October 15th for spring programs. Awards available include the D Family Global Scholarship, the Global Internship Summer Travel Grant, the Institute of World Languages Scholarship, and the Sue and Lee Pyfo International Scholarship. Numerous scholarships available outside of the ISO administered category are available through individual schools, departments, and units within UVA, including the IRC Travel and Learn Grant and school-specific awards for architecture and nursing students. Most outside providers have scholarships available as well, including CIEE, IES Abroad, and SIT. Lastly, check to see if you are eligible to apply for national or international level scholarships such as the Gilman International Scholarship for Pell Grant recipients, the Fund for Education Abroad, and the range of Diversity Abroad awards. Make sure to visit our website for a more comprehensive list, which includes those that I've highlighted here. Tips and strategies for scholarships. You are encouraged to start researching scholarship options early on in the study abroad planning process. Deadlines are usually separate from and may occur before the program application deadlines, and you'll want to take time to identify which options you qualify to apply for. The eligibility criteria for scholarships varies based on financial need, credit, sometimes the number of credits, length of program, location, academic focus, and so on. If your scholarship application has a written component, which most do, this is where you'll want to spend a lot of your energy in writing for impact, conveying your response clearly and concisely while making sure to address the prompt and taking advantage of writing resources such as the Writing Center or your Education Abroad advisor. Lastly, cast a wide net and apply to multiple scholarship opportunities that you are eligible for so that you aren't relying on just one source of funding. So to summarize, there is a program for every budget. It is just really never too early to start planning. We encourage you to use the tools and tips from this session, which is being recorded and will be made available. Take the Education Abroad workshop on our website to learn more about education abroad generally. And also talk to people. So schedule an appointment with an Education Abroad advisor. Talk to SFS if you have specific questions about your financial aid eligibility or situation. And perhaps most importantly, talk to your family about your interest. It's important that they are on board. Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, the session has been recorded and we will make it available for viewing again. Please visit educationabroad.virginia.edu for the workshop, to schedule an appointment with an advisor, review program information, and find resources about finances and scholarships for study abroad. Please visit sfs.virginia.edu for information about financial aid and financing study abroad. Thank you.